listening to 89.7 FM Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue Show, where we interview remarkable people. Today on the show, I have an ordinary man with an extraordinary life, who is actually quite a remarkable individual. Dr. Malcolm Linsell, who is a plastic surgeon and an author, has the most phenomenal story for us and a life that has been fascinating. Thank you so much for making the time to come and sit with us.
You're very welcome, Natasha.
I was under the impression that you actually lived somewhere other than Sydney, because you fly in and out literally all the time. You actually work between Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales.
That's correct. I actually live here in Sydney. I live in Rose Bay, but I work in Victoria and Queensland as well as here in Sydney. So I actually fly in, fly out to the other places.
You're a very busy man. Now,
Qantas love me.
Do they? Do you have
do.
like a special, do they give you like have you got like a special card and, you know, all the rest of it?
Well, I'm a Platinum 1 frequent flyer. Yes,
They made a movie about that with George Clooney.
Yes, they did.
And he had a very sad life, so I don't want you to
mine's
go.
a lot better than that.
I am going to take you back a little bit to the beginning. You were born into a Salvation Army family.
I was.
Now, Salvation Army, which I never realized, and it's probably a failure on my part, is actually a Christian organization.
The Salvation Army is fundamentally a Christian church, and their charity work stems out from that. And I was born into a Salvation Army family with a long tradition. My grandparents were Salvation Army officers, my parents were Salvation Army officers, and my brother became a Salvation Army officer. And so the Salvation Army and Christianity was fundamental to my upbringing.
Do you think that being a part of a church that is based on caring for people had something to do with the way that you actually moved in your life?
No question of that. My parents wanted to make a difference in people's lives, and they chose the Christian ministry to do that. And from an early age, I wanted to make a difference as well, and felt that medicine was the way that I could do that, because I decided to be a doctor from about the age of 6, and I'm not sure that I had all that much of an altruistic motive at that time, but I knew that that was what I wanted to do, and I would read medical books even as a kid. You know, I'd look at pictures of the body and read about doctors staying up all night doing things and think how wonderful that would be. When I got to that, I wasn't sure that was so wonderful.
I'm going to talk about that quickly, because you mentioned in your book, what is it, the surgical orgasm?
Yes,
which I think is a chapter in your book. Your book is called An Ordinary Man, Extraordinary Life. And, you know, when I asked you what that orgasm was like, you said you're still really waiting for it.
That's true. It was. I was training at the time, and I was training in vascular surgery. And when somebody has a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, that's a major emergency, because it really is a life and death situation. And I had one of those on each of the 2 preceding nights. So essentially I'd been up all night. And I remember shaving in the operating theatre and cutting myself, trying to get ready for the next day's ward round. But I remember the following night, I just sort of got home, and I was called by one of my consultant surgeons and said, we have another AAA, as it was called. And I said,
what is that? What is a AAA?
AAA is abdominal aortic aneurysm, which means it's ruptured, and the patient, unless they have surgical intervention, that they will die.
Oh, wow.
And he said, come on, we've got to do it. And I said, Sammy, I just don't think I can do it. And he says, come on, son, you know, you're about to have a surgical orgasm. And I as a young, upstanding Salvation Army man, I thought this might be a great thing. And yes, I'm still waiting for that.
You're still waiting for that surgical orgasm. You're listening to 89.7 FM Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue Show, where I interview remarkable people. On the show today, I have an incredible guest, Dr. Malcolm Linsell, who is a plastic surgeon and an author. What did happen to you, though, was you burnt your hands as a young child severely. I mean, your one hand is quite badly scarred. The other has a scar as well. And that was pivotal to how you developed as an adult. Tell us a little bit about that.
When I was 12 months of age, my mum was making lollies for the local Salvation Army fair, and I managed somehow to crawl up the stove and put both hands on the hot plate, and sustained full thickness burns to the palms of both my hands. And this was in northern Victoria, so medical care was fairly rudimentary, so they were just bandaged up and allowed to heal. As I got older, my hands started to grow, but scar tissue is inelastic, so it doesn't stretch. And so when I got to 13 and I was going through puberty, my hand grew, but because the scar tissue was strong, it started to pull my fingers in towards each other. I actually needed a surgical procedure, and that was done by a plastic surgeon. And he needed to incise the scar, release it, and then put a skin graft in there. And that was done in a hospital, and I remember that was such fun for me.
Oh, really?
A young boy wanting to be a doctor, fascinated by everything in the operating theatre. But when I was discharged from hospital and then had my stitches taken out by the surgeon in his rooms, I was waiting outside for my father to pick me up after this had happened. And the surgeon drove out of his rooms and drove down the road in a Jaguar, and I distinctly remember saying to myself, I want to be like that man. And 20 years later became a plastic surgeon.
That man also failed you twice, didn't he? I mean, that is an interesting turn of events. Literally, you went and you studied, and you sat your exams twice and failed them twice, and both of the times he was actually on the marking team. And then the third time when you passed, he wasn't on that team.
Yes, that's a major disappointment for me.
Did you tell him that?
Yes, I did.
Does he know?
Subsequently, he didn't know at the time that I'd been a patient of his 20 years previously.
Oh,
but subsequently, after I had passed and I met him at conferences and I chatted with him on the phone, we've both laughed about that.
You said to me, interestingly, you were good at things, but never the best. You were good at everything, but never the best. You were a great musician in the Salvation Army band, and you played the hornet. And you went to Royal Albert Hall and played there, and you were a soloist. And yet you still feel that you weren't the best, but you were picked as a soloist. So, I mean, that has to be pretty good.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I call myself an ordinary man, because I believe I have some talent and I have some skill, and that's true. And what I do have is I really work hard on the things that I have to try and be as good as I can be. So yes, I was really privileged to play in particularly the Camberwell Salvation Army Band in Victoria, and we did several interstate, international tours, and played in the Royal Albert Hall on a couple of occasions, which I loved because that was always a dream to play in the Royal Albert Hall. And that is so special to be on stage there and to look out to 5,000 people. And then to play, I didn't actually get to play a solo, but as part of the band I played some solo parts, and that's so special to be playing in that world famous auditorium. And
I think
it's one of my greatest thrills.
I think it sounds amazing. I think you've had a couple of amazing thrills in your life. Quite a few highs, quite a lot of lows, which I think have really balanced out that life of yours. One of the things that is listed in the book as a real turning point for you was working with a young boy up in Papua New Guinea. Now, I looked at the photograph and it sent chills. In fact, I actually thought I was going to start to cry, but I didn't want to do that in front of you. It's a very confronting image of a young, burnt child.
When I just graduated from plastic surgery, the Salvation Army did an article on me, and it was published in their War Cry, which is their newspaper. And that War Cry, I thought, would only be seen by people in pubs. That's the general readership.
Great.
However, it was actually seen by a young female Salvation Army worker in the eastern highlands of Papua New Guinea, Lorraine Mack. And Lorraine knew of Wesley, who had been burnt in a fire. And she contacted me. How in the heck she got my email address, I've no idea. But she contacted me, sent me photographs, and when I saw Wesley's photograph, I went, oh my gosh, what can we do here? And
let's just explain to everyone what that photograph actually looks like.
Wes was 3 or 4 years of age when he fell into the fire. And again, medical care was fairly rudimentary there, and so he was left to heal pretty much of his own accord, and his head lopped onto his chest because he didn't have the strength to hold his head up. And so, as a result, his head was twisted 90 degrees to where it should have been, and it essentially lay on his chest, and that's where it fused. So that when he came to us, his head was 90 degrees to the normal position, and his mouth was attached somewhere over to the left side of his chest. It was, I'd never seen anything like it, and I've never seen anything like it since.
You then helped him. You actually, he's had several surgeries in order to actually, as we said, he's now quite cool and lives in Sydney. But that journey for you, what did that journey do for you in terms of what you feel about your industry?
It really had a profound impact on me. Maybe not so much at the time, because at the time I was just focused on firstly keeping Wesley alive, because his surgery was challenging just in that sense. But seeing Wesley now 20 years later, and seeing him as a functioning normal human being who, he's become cool, and knowing that I had an impact in his life, because Wesley would have died if there wasn't any surgical intervention. And if the Salvation Army hadn't come to his aid, that would be the case. But now that I look back and I can see that this has made a difference in the way Wesley feels about himself. Now, certainly the function is dramatically different to how it would be, but the way he perceives himself now is dramatically different to how he used to. And I see that now he feels good about himself, and it's similar to the work that I do in the cosmetic line even, because when I can make a difference like that and people, particularly women, feel good about themselves, that I really love to do.
You specialize in stomach, plastic surgery for stomachs and for boobs. Breasts. What is the right terminology for it? I'm just curious, because I would say boobs. What would you say?
Yeah, and whatever, and it's breasts mostly, but boobs, yes, I fully understand that. And most of my patients tend to be mothers who've had children.
Okay.
And it's common for me to hear, I love my children, however, I want my body back. And so it's really about trying to put women back to where they used to be. And again, it's not a reflection on their family or on motherhood, but so many women say to me that, I had one girl just recently say that when I became a mother, I lost my identity. I became almost like my child's appendage. And if I have another child, I just become another appendage. So I can become an accessory in the family. And she said after she'd had an operation on her breasts, that she said, I've now got my identity back. I feel like me again, and I feel more confident, and I feel more sexy. And that impacts not only her, but it impacts her partner, it impacts her children and those around her.
It's interesting because children actually like you to look quite good. My son said to me the other day, he said, can you get dressed before you drop me at school? Because normally I like to, fly out in my pajamas. And I said, why? He said, because I want to be proud of you.
Absolutely.
I felt quite awkward. I said, no, I'll be going out like I normally do. But, they do notice, your children notice how you look. When you look good, they'll say to you, you look pretty today.
I had another woman just this week say to me, the relationship she has with her son has changed dramatically. Her son is 17, and I recently did a tummy tuck as well as a breast reduction on her. And she said, my 17-year-old recently said, Mum, I'm so proud of you, and I want to spend time with you. I want you to come and have coffee with me in a cafe, because I love being around you. And that was different to how it used to be.
Because she lacked the confidence to actually maybe be fun and maybe be, proud of herself.
Yes, that's how it starts. You're proud of yourself, you're confident in yourself. Other people pick that up.
We mentioned when we were talking earlier about boob jobs and, augmentation particularly. And I was saying that, quite a few of my friends have had those. And it's interesting because unlike the stomach, which is different. I mean, it does give you back some confidence. It's not an area that people see quite a lot, but your cleavage is something that's a huge part of a woman, and that is more to do with your sexuality, more to do with that sexy side of you. And yet you said so many women do that for their female friends as opposed to their male partners.
No, I'm still learning about this, so I don't profess to understand
You never will.
completely, and that's exactly
It's
right. So I've come to understand that too. But what I do notice is that many men, in particular, think that women increase the size of their breasts or have their breasts done. For men, it's not true. You know, women are doing that because they love to feel good in the clothes they wear in particular, and so they love to feel balanced. They love to feel in proportion. They love to fill out their clothes. And often if they're wearing cleavage, it's not necessarily for a man. They're often doing it for not only themselves, but for their girlfriends as well.
Well, your girlfriends are the ones who are going to comment more.
Exactly.
They're the ones who actually will talk about it. You're listening to 89.7 FM Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and the Dialogue Show, where I interview remarkable people. On the show today, I have an incredible guest, Dr. Malcolm Linsell, who is a plastic surgeon and an author. You have had some significant failures. I love the story about how you actually decided to move away from medicine and went off to Singapore to actually become part of a business group, which you soon discovered was actually a commercial cult.
Yes.
I love the word. I just have visions of you wearing orange and, with a shaved head, which of course you've kept. And, and how did an intelligent, educated man land up in such a poor situation?
I still ask myself the same question. I've, as I said earlier, always wanted to make a difference in people's lives. The thing I felt about just using my hands is that I didn't have the so-called leverage that business people talk about. And so I was looking for something else and looking to make a difference in many people's lives, and came across an organisation which I felt was aligned with that, and they wanted to make a difference in many people's lives, physically, mentally, emotionally and spiritually. And I was sort of enrolled in along with this vision because I totally believed in what this organisation was wanting to do. It was run by two charismatic people, and after a period of time, I found that, and my wife and I and our two children, we moved to Singapore to work in this business full time. But money was very scarce, and cut a long story short, we lost all of our money, and we were living day to day on just about nothing. And it was very, very confronting. And yet I was sort of, my background is never give up, no plan B, just have a plan A.
We spoke about that, and it was actually really interesting. And you followed that idea that burn the boats behind you and keep moving forward in one direction.
Correct.
But you've actually decided since that really is not the right way to go about living life.
I don't think that's a smart way to go about it. It's certainly in my life, because I found that there are many things that can happen in life that we haven't planned for. And I think if we do have backup plans B, C, D, E and F, then you can always fall back on them. And many in sports say that you must go forward, never give up. But I have a different view now with the experiences that I've had.
That business idea ended very poorly for you.
Yeah.
I mean, your marriage ended.
Yep.
Which was very difficult, and you felt like you were really at the edge. What made you make that decision to kind of change? And I mean, you had a skill sitting right there in your hands.
It took major catastrophe, I think, for me to wake up to myself, because I lost all my money. My wife left the family, and I had a stroke as well, and I actually took that for me to realize if I don't do something different, then I may not be around, and I've got two children to look after, and one of the great things to come out of that whole sort of disastrous period is that firstly my values haven't changed, that at the core is the honesty, integrity, wanting to do the right thing, and also my love for my children hasn't changed at all, in fact has grown. So that came through it, but I then recognized, well, I've got to do something. And I didn't actually know that I could go back into medicine. I'd been out for 6 years, but the process back in was remarkably easy. And, within a few months of me deciding I've had enough of the previous business, I must go back into medicine, I was back observing surgery and then eventually doing surgery.
Wesley was a large part of that process, wasn't he? You actually came back and managed to reconnect with him again, and he was living in Sydney. What happened there? Because, I mean, that was quite an interesting story. 60 Minutes actually started doing a program on it, shelved it, and then you actually got that up and going again.
Yeah, that's correct. When I was deciding to come back into medicine and to surgery, I thought of Wesley, and I hadn't seen him for 22 years. I didn't even know if he was alive. I'd lost complete contact with him. Through Facebook, I made some inquiries.
Gotta love Facebook.
Isn't it amazing? And found out that Wes was actually not only alive, he was living in Sydney, not far from where I was, and he was actually working for the Salvation Army. And so I called Lorraine, who'd been the first person who contacted me 23 years previously.
My goodness.
And said, I'm here. I'd love to meet up. And she said, Wesley will be so excited. So we met, and he was just normal. We talked, we laughed. He bought the drinks, which I think was fantastic. And he said, in his laconic way, if I'd like you to do some more work on me. And I wasn't even back in medicine at the time, but I said, if I get back in, I will. And so a few months later, I was back in, I was doing surgery, and I called him and said, okay, we can now do it. And I then called up 60 Minutes. And interestingly, I asked for Stephen Taylor, who'd been the original producer when we'd first done the filming 23 years previously.
Goodness.
And Stephen was still working for 60 Minutes. And he apologised to me and said, Malcolm, I'm so sorry it didn't go to air because Wes at the time wasn't able to communicate with cameras, so we didn't think it would be accepted by the Australian people, but I'm interested in what's happening now. And I said, well, he's normal, he will talk. and
buy you a drink.
Yeah, and so he went away and then came back to me a week later and said, we'd love to do the story. We've found original footage, which is gathering dust at one of Channel 9's dungeons. And we'd also like to take you back to Papua New Guinea, or me to Papua New Guinea with Wesley to meet his family. And so that took place the beginning of last year. And the subsequent story was shown on Mother's Day last year, and which had a fairly big reception.
I imagine would have had a phenomenal reception. What's on the cards for you now? You've remarried, you live around the corner, you've got 2 stepchildren, you've grown your family, you look happy. I have to say that I did notice when you came in that the man on who has a very nice tan as well, I might add, on the cover of your book is substantially older looking than you look.
Thank you very much.
You arrived and I thought maybe he was your dad. So you said that they thought maybe you need to look a little bit more wizened, wizened, whatever
wise
it is.
and hardened.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously the work is going well. Where to from here?
I'm at the best time in my life. I really have remarried the most beautiful, intelligent woman that I can imagine. I feel incredibly grateful on a daily basis. I have, you're right, my family's expanded. I've got 4 intelligent adults as children, and I couldn't be more proud. And from my practice perspective, I'm working in Melbourne and Queensland, but I'm just expanding my work here in Sydney as well. So I'm really excited about that. And I've in fact been consulting with a patient here in Sydney today. So I'm really excited for the rest of my life. And I see it as being in plastic surgery, because I really get now how much difference I can make in a person's life from the skills that I have, and that is incredibly fulfilling for me.
obviously, given that you've had these incredible ups and downs, I'm curious about what on an emotional level challenges you. What do you struggle with emotionally? You said you had a little bit of depression when, you went through that terrible time, but I think that was more circumstantial than anything else. What's hard for you?
What's hard for one of the things that I can see where I have a role in the future is almost to give women a voice, because I think some of the things that I've talked about today, many women will go, yep, that's actually right, but it's not understood by the community. And if I can actually give a voice to say this is what particularly mothers are actually going through, then maybe there'll be more understanding. And it's not so much about plastic surgery per se, but I really am starting to understand more about the what it costs for a woman to have children, and it's not about that they don't love their children and care for their children, but pregnancy ravages the body, and I don't think as a man that I've taken that into consideration a great deal in the past. Now more men are nowadays, and I think if I can give more of a voice for that, there'll be more understanding from both men and women.
What makes you cry?
When I know I've made a difference. It still does.
It's happy tears.
Yeah.
Happy tears.
And,
you have made a difference.
Yeah, and as I said before, when I went back to Papua New Guinea and Wesley's dad recognised me 22 years later, put his arms around me and said, "Thank you, Malcolm." That made me cry. Unfortunately, Karl Stefanovic thought that was great on national television.
I'm sure.
But it's true, those sorts of things, when I really know I've made a difference, that impacts me deeply.
We've come to the end of the interview, and I am so grateful that you found the time to come in and have this chat to me. It's been so amazing meeting you. You have a really beautiful energy. Wish you just the best of luck.
Thank you, Natasha. It's been my pleasure.